7. Well, youthquake, this term was coined by Vogue magazine in the 1960s, but it's been dragged into modern parlance in the British election, as 1 million young people, shocked by the Brexit result, registered to vote. Labour in the UK under Jeremy Corbyn benefited most from those votes, but it was because he engaged far more with voters than Theresa May. Or was it the promise of scrapping tuition fees? Most importantly, can Labour make it happen here? Let's talk now with the Labour leader, Andrew Little. He's in the Wellington studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Susie.
Now, just before we get on to that, we would like to talk about that a bit. We would also like to ask you about a story. It's breaking just in the last half hour on Newsroom this morning concerning the taping of an employee by National Party MP Todd Barclay. This resulted in an alleged payout. We have got calls in this morning to both the current Prime Minister Bill English and to Todd Barclay himself. But if I can just ask you, what is your take on this story that is just coming out this morning?
I've had a very swift read of the material that's gone up on Newsroom. Obviously, this story has been around for a couple of years now. I think what is disturbing is, first of all, that an MP with an allegation against him and a police inquiry refused to cooperate with the police inquiry, and I think that's left some grey areas and some doubts about, his involvement in it. I think what of new information that comes out in the article, what is interesting is obviously there was a reasonably significant payout, and it has been funded at least in part from the Prime Minister's office, which I would have thought was unusual.
Now, clearly it's early days. We can't probably dwell on this any further, although I would reiterate that we do have the calls in to the Prime Minister Bill English and to the MP concerned Todd Barclay. We would be very keen to hear from them on Morning Report. Let's though get back to the issue of a youthquake. Is this something that you are wanting to create, and if so, how? Well,
I think when you're campaigning, you're trying to get every vote you can, and we know that there's been an underrepresentation of young voters in previous elections. The approach we've taken, or we are taking right now, which we modelled in the by-elections last year and in the local government elections last year, is maximising our direct voter contact. So we have a pretty sophisticated system set up for making phone calls, knocking on the doors, just contacting people wherever they are. What is interesting is I get around and look at the meetings of our activist networks, as the large number of younger people who are turning up, actually, and it's not just voting age people, it's actually the number of people who won't even be of voting age in September this year, but who are concerned enough about issues, and it's usually issues of the environment and education and their future, and certainly housing features amongst it too. They're turning up wanting to help. So there is something about getting the right issues that motivate young people to get involved.
Well, the right issues, and to some extent, don't young voters vote on the same sort of things that older voters do? Don't they need some kind of a lolly scramble?
Well, they want a sense that the way government is running itself is thinking about the future and thinking about their future. And we've made the pledge already about 3 years free post-school education and training.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that one, actually, because how many Labour-led governments do there have to be before that comes in?
Well, it was going to take us 7 years, I think, to implement, because it won't. We can't do it straight away.
So it's going to be the third Labour-led government that actually comes in.
It'll be the beginning of a third term. If we can accelerate it and bring it forward, then we will. We've done. We announced that policy at the beginning of last year. It was based on the projections about what tax revenue was coming in and so on. That's changed a little bit, but then also the government spending plans have changed a bit.
So is there any consideration to bring that in any sooner? Because that's the kind of thing I would imagine that would capture the imaginations of first-time voters this time round. But it's not something that would actually necessarily help them immediately.
Yes, and I think, yes, if we could do it more quickly, then we would. I think we've been very realistic about what we can do. I mean, there are other challenges too about issues that tend to affect more young people than older people, and we've got to look at all those issues. For young people, actually, environmental issues are a huge issue. Climate change especially.
Sure.
They're the ones going, with 70, 80 years of their life ahead of them. So they're thinking about these things. They want to know action's being taken now.
But don't you need to be bolder on this one? Don't you need to be in a position of saying, look, the surplus forecasts are better than expected. This means we can bring this in sooner. In fact, look, let's say free tertiary education from next year, from 2 years' time. Isn't that something that would really stick in the minds and fire the imaginations of people?
So there's a lot of things we have to do now, because even 18 months or nearly 2 years on, conditions have changed. about expected tax revenue, but then equally the government's changed its spending plans. That's why we are having a close look at the government's recent tax package. I do seriously doubt the merits of a tax package that puts $400 million in the pockets of the top 10% of earners when we have all these other challenges, housing challenges, health, and obviously in education too. So when we come to present our full kind of manifesto for the election, we want to have all those I's dotted and T's crossed. We will make realistic promises. I am absolutely determined because I spent my student years fighting against increased student fees to make sure that we have a tertiary education policy, post-school education policy, that means it is accessible to everybody who wants to get there.
But that may change from the current standing before the election.
The promise right now is the 3 years free implemented over effectively a 7-year period. If we can accelerate that and bring it up forward much more quickly, then we'll do that.
Now, regarding Brexit, regarding the UK, it seemed that it was Brexit that was the galvaniser for many young people to get them to turn out this time round. But they were essentially voting, weren't they, for the opposite of what you're offering now?
I'm not quite sure I'm with you.
Well, things like pulling out of trade deals, which is something you've said you would do, stopping immigration or at least dialing it back, stopping foreigners buying houses so easily over here. It's a more isolationist look for New Zealand, isn't it?
I think if you ask most young people in New Zealand what they think about TPPA, I think you'll find we line up very, very solidly with them on it. What people don't want, I think people do want free trade. They want good trade deals. What they don't want is trade deals that allow big, powerful countries like the US to dictate what our governments should do. On things like immigration, I think actually most people are realistic that in a country of our size, much smaller than the UK, can we have a quadrupling of immigration numbers over a 4-year period without it having an effect or compounding problems that we've already got, like a shortage of housing, like traffic congestion, like overcrowded schools? And I think most people are saying, actually, we do have to be sensible and practical about this. We've just got to get things in better balance. Nobody is saying, throw up the drawbridge and don't have anybody coming here. It's about getting it right for the conditions that we've got at the time.
Andrew Little, Labour leader, thank you very much for your time this morning. And while that interview was underway, we have heard back from the Prime Minister's office. He will not be coming on Morning Report today to speak about that breaking story coming out on Newsroom. He will, though, be speaking to reporters in Parliament as usual later on today, and the MP concerned, Todd Barclay, is not as yet returning our calls. It's 23 minutes to 8.
And coming up before 8 on Morning Report, foster parents wonder when the dysfunctional system